Hello everybody and welcome back. Thank you very much for joining me. My name is Deborah Hatswell and you're listening to BBR Investigations. Tonight I'm sharing some of the reports that have come in from listeners to the show, and in some of the cases I'm asking the witnesses to come forward again just with some further information, re the area the event happened or what year it was, what season it was, etc. And in others it's the witnesses themselves who are hoping that you guys out there can help them with some of the questions they have after they've encountered an event most of us would deal as impossible. But as I always say, extraordinary things happen to people from all walks of life. Sometimes they are a one-off event, and for others it can be a long-term thing. My next case tonight is called The Woods Came Alive and a Gunshot Rang Out. I was contacted by a lady named Hannah, and she said, "I'm new to your podcast and I'm loving it, Deb. Your style is so informative and interesting. So this strange and creepy story was related to me by my husband, and it happened to him and a group of friends around 25 years ago, before I met him. I don't think you've had anything quite like this story before. It's something that really needs to be heard aloud as it's so creepy. I always forget how the story usually freaks people out when I tell it. And it's something very strange and unusual, but something oddly familiar at the same time." So here goes. At the time, Phil was working as a forester, employing a small team of workers. And for 3 months in the summer, they'd park their caravans in Windsor Great Park. And working directly for the Queen of Head Forester, they'd spend the summer amongst, the woodland trees, tending the forest. They formed a little camp of 2 or 3 caravans in a small clearing, where they would cook food, have evening fires and enjoy the ancient woodland setting come evening. One evening, Phil and his then girlfriend, who was also one of the workers, had a row. Phil didn't want to go and stay with the group, so he got into his Land Rover and stormed off into the forest, seeking somewhere to park up overnight and calm down. He soon found somewhere, under a large oak tree, its gnarled branches swinging low to the ground around him. He pulled over, stopped the engine and tried to settle for the night. As his breathing quietened, he could faintly hear something around him outside in the forest. It was a low, slow, but heavy breathing sound. Phil listened for a while and shrugged it off, tried to sleep. However, the noise continued. A slow, deep breath in, and then a slow release. And as he listened, it very slowly grew louder, slowly, but inexorably louder and louder, and it would slowly gain in depth and resonance. A bit unnerved, Phil climbed out of the Land Rover, stood next to it listening, and by now it was the darkest hours of the night, and the canopy of trees above and all around blocked out most of the moonlight, creating deep, dark shadows all around. The breathing noise seemed to be coming from no particular direction. It was all around him, and slowly and deeply in, and then ever so slowly out, over and over again. Phil decided it was a bit too creepy to be listening to this breathing coming from the depths of the forest all around, with no indication of where it was coming from or what was making it. He got back into the Land Rover and headed back to the small camp, expecting to see, the little group of caravans all in dark, the fire out and everyone inside asleep. However, when he drove up there, they were all standing in the centre of the clearing, peering out into the dark forest. Phil stopped the engine and got out, walking back into the small group. They were all gathered in the darkness. Before he could say anything, one of the guys turned to him and asked, "What the hell is that noise?" And they all looked somewhat frightened, and as the little group all stood together listening, the noise grew slowly louder and started to become faster. The whole forest seemed to be alive, the heavy breathing bearing down on them from every direction. A deep, strong in-breath, and an exhalation, over and over and over, as if the whole forest was under immense exertion. In, out, in, out. The whole forest seemed to be hyperventilating. Suddenly, when they thought it could not get any louder or any more frantic, there was an in-breath, and it stopped dead. Then, across one side of the forest, at the far edge of the trees, they heard a huge explosion, and across the other side of the forest, they heard a single gunshot, and all was now deadly quiet. The gentle sound of the breeze in the trees, the only thing that could be heard. The group got in their cars, decided to head across to where the explosion had come from. It took a little while, as the forest is quite large, but as they got there, they saw a ball of flames surrounding a car. It had crashed into a tree, exploding and killing both occupants. The fire service was already there, so they went back to their camp to talk the night through, calm their nerves, and try to sleep. The next morning, over their breakfast fire, they heard a Land Rover and the Queen's Head Forester driving up through the trees towards them. He parked and got out and wandered over to Phil, and he said, "Strange night last night." Phil turned to him and asked, "Yeah, what was that?" The forester sighed, said to Phil, "It's happened before, like this, a few times since I've worked here. Every few years, the forest takes a soul." The two people in the car had passed away immediately, and the gunshot that rang out from the other side of the forest was a man who passed away at his own hand. "It's something Phil has never forgotten," she said. "Windsor Great Park has a lot of folklore and stories associated with it. The wild hunt is often seen or heard, and on occasions racing through it. It seems that the forest holds deep memories of forgotten times, forgotten ways. This sense of the land taking a soul is an ancient thing." She said, "I've also heard of the River Dart on Dartmouth taking a soul every year or so. And indeed, Dartmoor itself, our ancient land, holds many secrets. Very best wishes, Hannah." Hannah mentioned the wild hunt, and that's often put together with Herne the Hunter, the antlered one. The legend of Herne the Hunter dates back to the reign of King Richard II, and legend has it that Windsor's magnificent Great Park is haunted by an antlered spirit who rides a horse, torments cattle, and even rattles chains. The tale is that Herne was one of the keepers of the ancient Windsor Forest during the reign of King Richard II between 1377 and 1399. He was said to be exceptionally knowledgeable about the local woodland, and he was trusted by the king. The two would spend their days together hunting, and it's also believed Herne rescued the king from being attacked by a massive stag. Herne was severely injured, but was saved by a mysterious man who suddenly appeared on horseback. One of his somewhat unorthodox medical methods was to remove the antlers from the now dead stags and attach them to Herne's head. He was nursed back to health after the brutal attack and was eventually allowed to remove the antlers from his head, and he was rewarded by the king at Windsor Castle for his bravery. However, this didn't go down well with his fellow huntsmen, who decided the best way to proceed was to start rumours that Herne was in fact in favour of practising black magic and witchcraft. The king was having none of this, and he ordered the rumours to be stopped. The huntsman's next trick was to try to frame Herne for poaching, which they did, by hiding deerskins in his quarters. They also told the man, who had spent hours saving Herne's life, that he spent most of his time mocking him, particularly his bizarre use of the antlers. Sadly, their plan worked, and when the deer hides were discovered, the king now believed his friend had taken advantage of his position. He sacked him, and Hearn, devastated by what had happened, was found passed away the next day. The calculating huntsmen were thrilled by this, what a good result, thinking they'd soon become the king's favourites. This, however, never happened, largely due to them not being as good at hunting as Hearn was. King Richard II was said to have seen the ghost of Hearn not long after his death, when his hunts were producing no deer at all. He was furious. The huntsman who had framed Hearn believed that he'd cursed the forest, and so they admitted what they'd done to King Richard. The next night, while walking through the park trying to decide what to do, King Richard watched as a bolt of lightning struck a nearby oak tree, and then, through the clearing, he is said to have spotted a figure beneath the tree with antlers on top of its head, and it was Hearn. And the legend has it, he told the king that the conniving huntsman should be punished, and they were put to death immediately, and the deer returned to the forest once again. That's absolutely chilling, isn't it, when you think about it? And in the same place is a very modern report, 1991, and it's a gentleman who contacted BBR through YouTube, and he said, in late November of 91, I was visiting Windsor Great Park when I saw what I can only describe as an out-of-this-world kind of dog. It wasn't an ordinary dog. I don't know how to describe it. I wonder if he's talking about a phantom dog, possibly, or a shuck, or, as it's said to happen there, the huntsman, the hounds that are supposed to, is it the wild hunt they call it, that runs through the forest at certain times? I'm not really sure, but it's absolutely fascinating. If you're a regular listener to our live streams, which usually happen on a Saturday around about 9 p.m. GMT time, you will have heard me last week speaking about some of the reports that were in Bristol. Lee Woods is a very famous place and has a number of cryptid and paranormal reports. And I had a case come in from Bristol. And honestly, I'd like the witness to please contact me again. I cannot find her contact details anywhere. I've spent the last week trying to sort them out. And I'm unsure whether it was okay to use her name. So, for the sake of error, I've decided to just use her first initial for now. And this is titled, Local Woman Sees a Jet Black Werewolf in Bristol. Kay said, Hi, I contacted you as I've had lots of odd things happen to me in my time. My friend told me about your podcast and I've listened to every episode since. I've had a werewolf sighting in Bristol many years ago. I also saw 3 wolves, again in Bristol, not werewolves, but very big wolves, and nobody else saw them but me. I felt like I was balmy, but I'm 100% about what I saw, and I saw them, and they saw me, and they looked right at me. The werewolf that I saw didn't seem to see me, or my boyfriend, who I was with at the time. I was so scared, I actually wet myself. During my life, I've had lots of weird events. I've seen an alien orb above my bed. It's hard to describe it, but it looked like a spider-like thing with a tiny alien face surrounded in a glowing orb. I've seen my grandfather's spirit and the ghost of a lady. I saw the lady not far from where we had the werewolf sighting. There has also been strange growling, and it sounds like something demonic, and it would be growling under the home, under a bed in my mum's spare room. That used to be my old room. I've heard it 3 or 4 times. Myself and my mum have heard it. She's heard it a lot more though. Again, all of this activity was within a short distance from where I saw the werewolf and that lady's ghost. We lived at Holly Hedge Animal Sanctuary in Barrow Gurney, where my mum, she was a manager there. I was about 10 or 11 at the time. And there are woods that joined onto the grounds of Barrow Hospital. They're not there now, they're gone. In those woods, we'd find dead animals, deer, cows, pigs and sheep, all neatly cut and with what I would say looked like they'd been sliced in half with a laser type thing. All of the adults told us young ones it was the farmer dumping dead livestock. I never believed it, due to the day. And how were they so neatly sliced? I went on to meet a boyfriend who ran out of the woods whilst taking a wee. He was swearing that he saw a UFO in there. He was as white as a ghost, and we broke up not long after. I think all of this activity is connected to my family and the land, as my mum has suffered an alien abduction in the very same area. She wouldn't talk about it for years. I've had some odd experiences that I believe are alien-like that happen, and they surround my young son who's autistic. He isn't verbal, he's 10, and he seems to see or feel energy changes. Me and my daughter also picked up on a dark energy at Lee Woods. We didn't see it clearly with the naked eye, as it was dark, but we saw a shape of something big. We felt terrified and jumped straight back in the car. One time with my son, we were in Wiltshire, and he just went absolutely crazy. His energy was off the scale, and it felt like there was an electricity in the air. We had a road that was closed off, and I said to my partner, "That's not a crash." I don't know why I said that. And as we got nearer, we could see down the closed road, and there were lots of black vehicles. No police, no ambulances, just 8 and 9 black vehicles. Some were long cars, or at least 2 were vans. And I wonder if they were the men in black, because something was seriously odd. Now, there's a fair more odd things that have happened, things my mum, and the children have seen. I think the one that has always stayed with me, that I think of more than most, is the experience with that werewolf. I remember how it stood there, and it was the size of a pony. It was on all fours, standing on a mound of grass. It was jet black. I didn't see its eyes or its face, as it wasn't facing me head on, but it looked almost majestic. It was definitely covered in hair, as you could see it blowing around. It was absolutely massive and shaped like a German shepherd. I don't know what else it could have been. I've seen all shapes and sizes of dogs with my mum. She does animal rescue work. This was way bigger than a Great Dane. Only a few years ago, I was speaking to my friend who said, "It sounds like something that's come through from a different dimension." It should have seen us, and it would definitely have heard us, as we had to run in its direction to get to the long path on the hill. I honestly thought it was coming for me from the other side of those woods, and it'd be interesting to see if any other people have had sightings around that same area. My son had a traumatic experience in the woods where we used to go often. It's called Stockhill Woods. It's in Priddy in Somerset. And we got out of the car once, and he suddenly started crying and attacking himself. Now, he can self-harm with his disability, but this was extreme, even for him. He was pulling away, trying to get away from the entrance. I encouraged him to go in, burn off the energy, because usually woodlands are very calming for him. Things got so bad, he started to pull at his face and hands ripping at each cheek, and he made sounds that I'd never heard him make before. I did say to his dad, half joking, "My God, is it a full moon or something?" We had to leave, as he was beyond distraught. I checked later that night, and it actually was a full moon. I've not took him back since. We've been to the Forest of Dean, no sightings of anything, no distress since then. He really enjoyed himself. I believe he picked up on something that evening, and I bought a notepad. I'm going to start writing down all the quirky things that have happened, but I haven't had time yet. I just wanted to reach out to you, Deb, as you sound so down to earth, whilst acknowledging that there are beings out there that we don't get told about, and they are very bloody real. Not always an open topic for conversation. It's not easy to talk about. Thank you so much for sharing and telling all of the paranormal oddities that, go on out there. It's been really comforting and sometimes spine-chilling listening to you. I'd be happy to go into more detail on these encounters if you ever would like more. Just let me know. I think lots of children that are on the spectrum are tuning in to energy and picking up on things that are around them. It's natural for them. They tune into them easily. And I think that's why mainstream kind of struggles with them. They don't understand them. They see the world in the way that we did back in our primal days. They don't have any connection to the modern world. And they react instinctively, on their gut. There's no social greying of personality, if you get what I mean. What you see is what you get. And I think he is picking up on energy, and it's clearly mum's experienced things in her life, and so has grandma. And I think if they look back down the generations, each generation, there would be someone, at least one person, who experienced the same thing. So please, there are a number of accounts nearby. It sits on an estuary, and as we know, you get clusters of reports around estuaries. And there's a case where a number of local kids see a large white wolf. And this came in from one of the listeners also, and they said, "Hi Deb, I hope this is the best way to contact you. I watch your YouTube all the time. I've always been interested in the supernatural, cryptid things, since I was a small child. I used to buy the books from Woolworths about Bigfoot and ghosts, and I've always had a feeling they were real. I just remembered my nan and my mum telling me about my uncle, seeing something back in the 1980s. He was 3 years older than me, so he would have been about 16 at the time. He was one of 13 children and the youngest, and a bit wayward. I don't have a lot of details, but what I do have may interest you. And maybe it might be similar to someone else out there or in the same area." The story goes that he and a group of mates were off out over the local park. The park's vast, and he said, he was a bit wayward. And back when glue sniffing was a big thing, him and his friends used to go over to the park and hide in the bushes and do that. On this day, they were heading back out of the park, about 5 or 6 boys from what I can remember, and it was dark. And they always walked through the lane that would bring them out to where everyone basically lived, like a stone's throw from each other. Well, they were walking back through the lane when this big white dog, wolf-like creature, jumped on top of the wall, and it stood up. And they said it was really tall. The wall was about 6 feet, and he had no problem clearing it. They absolutely crapped themselves and ran. And my nan said he came home in a right state. My mum and nan said after they spoke, they had talked about it to each other, he must have been hallucinating out of his head, and he tried to be adamant that that's not what happened and he knows what he saw. Sorry I don't have much detail, Deb. This was in Bristol, in an area called Vassals Park. It's twinned with snuff mills. There's rivers running through, plenty of tree bushes, hiding places. It's famous for the unsolved murder as well of a number of young siblings in 1957. I wonder if those boys saw that wolf because there is a connection between death and wolves, sometimes a black wolf or sometimes a white wolf, and they'll be sent for a different reason. And what they were doing was quite dangerous, wasn't it? And I'm hoping that experience kind of stopped that for them. But it's like the shamans of old. They use substances to open up themselves spiritually. And that may be what's happened here. And it's hard to understand, in our modern brains, but it could be a connection of worlds. And there, like I say, there are a number of other reports in the area. And talking about large, strange dogs. Now, sadly, I wasn't given a location for this next case other than Ireland, so it could be anywhere in Ireland. And it's titled, "The Villagers Always Warned Us About the Big Black Dogs. They would come out at night." Now, this is from a YouTube listener. His channel's called Earthsmoke. And he said, "I had a weird experience myself, New Year's Eve, 1999. I'd like to share it with you, Deborah. The year I went home to Ireland, I went to spend Christmas with my family. It was nothing unusual, typical family stuff. Anyway, New Year's Eve came around, and I got a bit bored with the TV. So just before midnight, I fancied going outside for a walk. I didn't walk that far. I just trudged through the snow, down the little crossroads, about 200 yards from my parents' house. When I got there, I could have heard a pin drop. It was gorgeous to just stand there, taking in the silence. To give you an idea of how quiet it was in rural Ireland that night, when it struck midnight on the New Year, I could clearly hear the cheers, the celebrations, the fireworks from a little town about 8 miles away. After I'd been standing there for a period of time, I don't know why, but I got the urge to pray to all 4 cardinal directions, north, south, east, west. I said the prayer, and I changed direction to face each direction as I prayed. And I just began the 3rd prayer. I'm not sure what direction I was facing, to be honest, when, about 10 feet away from me, I heard the footsteps of a very big, very heavy animal appearing out of nowhere. Let me explain better. I didn't hear those footsteps coming from a distance, starting quietly and gradually getting louder and louder as they approached me. Oh no. These footsteps began 10 feet away from me, like they'd just landed there. Remember, I could hear the New Year celebrations from 8 miles away that night. I cannot stress how disturbed this sound made me feel to my very core. And as soon as my mind registered those sounds, something took over me, and I didn't stop running until I was at my parents' front door again. But here's another freaky thing. When sheer reflex action combined with blind panic got me out of there, and I turned to run, I also heard sounds behind me, like this thing was trying to slow itself down and change direction. I also heard a jowly, saliva-laden sort of jaw sound, like a really big dog makes when it's trying to slow down to catch a ball, for instance. Anyway, it was too late. I was gone. When I got back inside the house, my mum literally said, "Geez, you look like you've just seen a ghost." And I replied, "I think I fucking have." And I recounted the whole story. While I was telling them the story, I noticed my dad was listening very intently, but he wasn't looking at me directly, kind of giving me a side eye, and I'm thinking about what I'd said. My dad isn't a religious diehard skeptic. He always said he didn't believe in anything except the pound in his pocket. So I thought, I bet my dad don't believe me. But I left it and went to bed. The next morning, we were all eating breakfast. My mum asked me to tell her again what had happened the night before. And I retold the story. And again, I noticed my dad was giving me a kind of side-eye vibe. I said, "Dad, you think I'm crazy? Do you not believe me?" And he said, "Oh, no, you're not crazy." He went on, "When we were kids, the adults in the village always warned us not to go and play in the back fields after dark, or this big black dog will get you." He thought they were just taking the Michael, until he heard my story. My parents lived about a mile outside the village my dad grew up in, and their house was on the other side of what would have been called the back fields, when my dad was a kid. Not knowing the area, I'm unable to see if there are any similarities between this account and others I've taken, in the same place perhaps. But I did find a lot of information on the Black Dog of the Mounds. No, I know him as Cusi, but one of the great terrors of the ancient world, not so ancient to be honest, in Ireland was the Cusi, or the Hound of the Sea, the Fae. He was a monstrous beast, well known in all of the lands once ruled by the Gauls. He was also known as the Hound of Rage, which were the legendary hunting dogs. They were also called Old Black Twist of the Manly Glooms. A powerful brute, the hound was said to have dark green or a black coat and to be the size of a small horse, with burning fiery eyes and paws the size of a man's hand. Some of these beasts were white, with one red ear and one red eye, and it would make its home in rocky crevices and clefts, It roamed the moors and bogs, and when it wasn't out and about on fairy business, it was also known to haunt ancient roads and gallows trees and crossroads, and it loved storms better than any other weather. It hunted in deadly silence, but when it drew close to its prey, it would let out some howls or barks which could be heard for many miles, even far out at sea. And those who heard the barks and howls would be overcome with great fear until the last howl they might perish in terror alone. The Susi were said to appear and vanish as they wished, and to lead the souls of the departed to the afterlife. And the sight of it was said to portend death, for someone nearby. Perhaps this is the creature our witness encountered in the fields that night on lonely New Year's Eve. And it's said that the fae are strong around the time of the new moon. Now, the witness in our next case also fled as fast as he could from a creature he could hear but not see. This is called I Heard Something Fucking Terrifying. It made me skin crawl. Deb, there's an experience I want to share with you that happened way back when I was about 13 or so. I think it was 88, 89. I was out riding my bike late September, down on what we used to call the slag tips. So this took place on the Wharton side of the River Kay, not on the Carnforth side. If you pull up Google Maps, stick in Carnforth, Lancashire, and head north about half a mile, you'll see the Kay. Follow this out towards the bay on satellite view. You can see the old slag heap from when Carnforth had its own ironworks. Yeah, I know, it sounds mental, but it's true. So I was riding my bike out there. I was getting towards dusk. I'm guessing it was probably about 5 p.m. It was a Saturday, and I remember that it was cold, and I was heading home. I reached the stock car track, which you can see in the satellite view, when I heard something fucking terrifying that made the skin on my head and down my neck fizz. From across the marsh, north towards a railway crossing, somewhere out there, I heard a very loud cry. It was a deep, moaning roar that ended with a scream, but not one fading into the other. It was like a dual tone. I'm not sure that that's the best description for it, but the scream part of it was high-pitched, and it was like layered on the roar or the moan. As I said, I was fucking terrified. There was nobody around, just me on my bike. It's getting dark, and the best part of a mile to civilization for me, and I was experiencing something seriously unlike anything I have ever heard before. Now, where I grew up, I was very familiar with all of the wild creatures and the sounds that they make. I'd explored it my entire life up to that point. This was something that I still worry about today, and I'm pushing 50. Anyway, Deb, I wanted to know if you've ever heard anything about any cryptid accounts for this area. This little isolated beauty spot is rich in history, but I've only heard about a phantom black dog, the bar guest, that my granddad encountered. Nothing else. This was not a phantom anything. It sounded very real. It was big, can scare her. So I pedalled home like mad, terrified that it was going to get me. I'm really hoping, with your knowledge, you may have some accounts close. In 1999, I found a reference someone wrote on a chat board forum where someone saw a werewolf and it was seen in Silverdale, but I can't find it now. It's probably long since gone. Now, for anyone wondering what our witness means when he said he was out on the slag heaps, it's something many of us kids in the UK know. It's probably overseas as well. When you do ironwork or mining, there's always the byproduct that's left over. It's known as slag. And that slag's piled up high. And nature reclaims it. They become a haven for wildlife, replacing cliff tops and habitat that hasn't been seen for decades. Regulars to my site know that mining land and land disturbed by smelting can have a negative effect on the essence of the land. and it can awaken some entities that make use, of that tear in the landscape to show themselves again after a millennia of dormancy. We literally awaken the sleeping beast. You remember Tom from Sussex, who saw some horrible creatures at his cottage? He experienced all manner of strange activity, on the land mined for iron for centuries. Here in my hometown, in Wigan, there are reports of strange creatures showing themselves to people using, the land. This report sits between several places where strange creatures and unidentified growls had been seen and heard by other witnesses. To the south, we have the Wardstone werewolf account and a young girl who ran in the forest of Bowling that actually broke her nose to get away from a dog-like creature. Both of those witnesses chose the same Google image to represent the creature they saw, even though they've never met. To the north, we have the reports in Cumbria that feature strange animal cries that cannot be identified.
It's a real pleasure.
This is a case out at Ennerdale Water. This also came from a listener, and they said, while I was hiking in the Ennerdale Lake area in Cumbria, I had a weird experience that I hadn't thought of until I saw the video you did where a bushcrafter had a weird experience in Sussex. On this trip, I pitched my tent at Ennerdale Water for the night. Cam was fine, until I woke up all of a sudden after hearing a heavy thud sound. It sounded like something that was heavy moving around me. It sounded like it was checking me and my camp out. It wasn't too close, and although I was half asleep at the time, I thought possibly it was day. I just went back to sleep. But now, listening to the video of yours, I realised that it didn't walk like a deer. It couldn't be a deer. The thudding footsteps are too heavy. I don't know. But I just thought I'd share this one with you. And next to it, there's another report, very, very close, and this is an ancient report, 1810, and it talks of what is called the girt dog of Ennerdale. Now, it sounds like the hound we were speaking about before, a savage predator that mercilessly killed sheep in Cumberland. The attacks went on for months, with up to 8 sheep a day being slaughtered, and a £10 reward was offered up for its capture. Now, there are a lot of reports not too far away that mention a strange growling creature, or something along the line that fits with this report. For me, it's like some of the other reports we've spoken about tonight. It sits on an estuary. There's a railway not far away, and that comes up often in cryptid reports. And people often wonder why. And think about it, when the trains stop at night time, they're just highways that you can walk along really fast. There's not many people out there, is there? I just think they work like green corridors do, possibly. Now, I've had quite a lot of reports coming from listeners. So next week, I'm going to be sharing the experiences of a number of other witnesses, Andrew Wainwright, Hoo-Ha, and the North Face, and several other reports that have been shared with me by my listeners on the show. If you want me to do your report, just drop a comment down below, and I'll give you my email address and we'll get something sorted out. But I'd like to thank our witnesses tonight for getting in touch. And as I say, if you have had an experience like this, or you know of an experience out there like that, or some information that you've learned through life that could help our witnesses out, we'd be really keen for you to get in touch. Any or all information is vital, and the more we can share, I think the more witnesses we can help, and the more mysteries we can solve. So if you enjoy my content, I will be back on the same day, at the same time, next week, with more cases from the BBR case files. Until then, good night, everyone.